So I'm curious, how many songs have you written? Like, do you know? Are you sure? Do you have like a number count that where you just like keep crossing it off? You know, another song.
That's a great question because at one point I was like, I'm gonna go through and like catalog all the songs I've written because I love writing by hand, and so it's not like I have like, oh, I have this many Google Docs or whatever.
Right.
So I was like, I'm gonna go through and try to, and I had never finished that project, but probably a couple hundred if I had to guess.
Wow.
You're listening to For the Record, conversations about music, mixing, and the creative industry. Today's guest is Julie Marie. Julie is a singer, songwriter in the greater Chicago area. She enjoys writing music that celebrates everyday life.
Welcome to For the Record. I am Jeremiah, and my guest today, Julie. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. I'm excited to see where these conversations go, especially this one right here.
Yeah.
2 episodes ago, we had Nathaniel on the show, and I don't know if you watched it. It's okay if you didn't. I won't judge you. But there was a point where he mentions you, then like examples of like music that he produced, and then we're like, we might have her on the show, and then we did. So I don't know. That was
and
fun.
here I am.
And here you are.
That's so fun.
Right. So I'd love for you to tell the audience and honestly myself a little bit about who you are.
Yeah. So I'm Julie Marie. Also, some people call me Julie. Either is totally fine. But all my music is under Julie Marie. And I am kind of a little bit new at like the artist thing, but I'm a singer-songwriter and I've kind of been doing the artist thing since I graduated college. I went to school for music business, and I've been songwriting for a long time and creating music for a long time. But I think I was a little bit in denial for even throughout college that I wanted to actually create music to share with other people myself as well.
Yeah.
Spent a long time like supporting other artists, which I still love to do, and doing other things in the music industry, which was super cool. But then kind of discovered like, oh, I love to also create and I love to share that. So yeah, I've kind of been pursuing that alongside also just like working a 9-to-5. And so it's cool to just kind of explore like what does it mean to be an artist? What does it look like to kind of be bivocational and do these 2 different things and exploring music like that too. So.
Yeah. I mean, the bivocational side of things, like that's really common. I mean, I'm even doing that right now and trying to run the studio. Like it's how it goes.
Totally.
You said something about for a long time you were supporting other artists more so than doing your own stuff.
Yeah.
What did that look like? Like in what ways were you supporting people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think a lot of different ways. I think especially when I was in college for music business. So we were doing lots of different kind of industry related things. And so I kind of focused on things that weren't really related to my own artistry. So I focused on learning about, music publishing, and I focused on learning about management. And some of these things were courses, but some of these things were just like things that I chose to focus on. And I really enjoyed learning about it and I loved doing it. But I think in that process discovered I love being on the other side of it too. One example of that is I did a semester in Nashville at a place called the Contemporary Music Center.
Okay.
And they do kind of like a semester away program for students from certain colleges. And there's 3 different tracks: the business track, the artist track, and the tech track. And so I did the business track, and for that whole semester I managed an artist. I did like graphic design for a tour that we did. I did booking for that tour. I did all these kinds of things in the business side of things.
Yeah.
And at the time, as we were going throughout that semester, I loved getting to do that, but at the same time, I was like, man, but I love songwriting, and I love creating, and I kind of wish I could also do the artist stuff. But I will say, like, looking back, I'm really grateful that I did that, because knowing that business side of things and the marketing and the booking, that stuff that, like, independent artists, we do it all for ourselves. So it's really helpful to know all of that.
Yeah, it kind of gives you an edge. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot, I'm sure there's a deep catalog of things you can learn from the artist side of things. But I feel like a lot of those things, correct me if I'm wrong, can be largely experiential and like self-taught, learning through like songwriting processes and things like that, and who you are as an artist, what your sound is. And I think it's harder to do that with the music business side of things.
Totally. I think that's really true. And especially a lot of being an artist is like connecting with other artists and learning from them and growing from, having other people give you feedback. And that is the kind of thing that, maybe it's harder to do outside of a concentrated setting where everyone's doing it. But it's, I think, a little bit maybe easier than learning that side of things that a lot of people still do learn through experience. And I know there's a lot of stuff that I still don't know, but having those like professors there to just be like, hey, this is how to book a show. This is how to, make sure your music is registered for copyright, like all these different things. It's like, that's really helpful to just kind of get your hand held through.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. Like I've thought about some of the things like in that realm, running a studio, there's a lot of music business side of things too. And since I didn't go to college for that, I feel sometimes like I'm a little bit handicapped. Like I'm like, okay, well, this is the end that I want to get to. I just have to figure out how to get there. So it probably would have been helpful having that side of things. So I could see that being special. I will say too, I think you alluded to this. There's this sense in the artist side of things where the biggest value is like the culture of creating, the culture of learning from other artists and kind of being vulnerable with your stuff, saying like, what do you think about this, getting feedback. And that I think is something that's unique on the artist side, maybe in the production side too, but that isn't so much in the business side. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
That's really true. I think that's something that I've really enjoyed exploring since I've kind of started the process of like being an artist and what does that look like and what does it look like for me to call myself an artist and to write songs and to share them. I think it's so huge to have that input from other people. Like something that's been so valuable for me is I have like a monthly Zoom group of songwriters and we just go around and we share songs and then we give each other feedback.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's so helpful to get that outside perspective on, hey, here's what seems like it's working, here's what's not working, how can we improve, what are some ideas? And so I think that collaborative aspect of artistry is definitely unique to that side of thing, and it's something that I feel like I'm still growing in. Like something that I would love to do more is like co-writing. Like I've done some co-writing, but it's definitely a muscle that I would love to kind of work out more.
Co-writes are challenging. So I would hardly call myself the best songwriter in the world. I've written some of my own stuff, and I feel like it's pretty good. But once I stepped into a room with like co-writers, or I went even just with a friend and I was like, let's the two of us write a song. It was hard. I didn't expect it to be that different, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to, first of all, to like take feedback that other people are giving. Like, what if we did this thing? It's hard to take that and be like, fine, yes, we can try that. But it's also, I found when I am by myself writing a song, an idea that may sound really stupid, I'm okay with myself knowing that. But the idea of like, what if I vocalize this before I've actually fleshed it out yet? Like, that's vulnerable and that's hard. And it's like, it's tricky for me to do that, at least I found.
Totally. I totally agree. I think there's a songwriter that I really admire. Her name is Sarah Groves, and she talks about, I went to a songwriting workshop that she did last year, and she kind of talks about songwriting and creating of any kind, but specifically because she's a songwriting, she kind of talks about it like scuba diving. Like as you get deeper into the creative process, you're kind of like going down deeper and deeper, and you get kind of in this like depths of writing and working. And then like if there's a distraction, it's like you bob immediately to the top. And I think with co-writing, it's hard because it's kind of like you're trying to get down into that depths together with another person. And like you suddenly have eyes on yourself of like, well, what am I doing? What does this sound like? Like you just said, it's almost like you judge your ideas before you can set them out. It's so vulnerable to be in that space of like deeply creating with someone else.
Yep.
But it's also really exciting when you can get to that place too, because that collaboration can make something better than you could have created on your own sometimes.
Yeah. I will say too, when I've been in the room, and I feel like I could, like I helped write a song for my church. I was the third guy in like a room of, there was three of us writing the song. And they like let me into their session. They wanted me to kind of be a part. And I think I had like a creative idea in like a direction of something, like what if instead of this chord you played this chord. But I feel like my contribution wasn't that great. And now like on everywhere that they've published it, it's like Jeremiah Shoemaker is like the third like writer. And I'm just like, I'm grateful, but I just feel like I didn't write that. But it's been cool seeing on the other side, like the people that welcome me into that and saying like, hey, you're a writer on this song, even if like your idea isn't like the crux of what changes, or even if none of your ideas contributed, like you were present in the creation of it. Like they've talked about how some of the associate pastors at the church have been involved with songwriting, and they are not musical at all, but they have like a deep artistic thought process. And so a lot of things, it's like, hey, I've just been thinking about this concept, and that becomes a song. And it's just cool seeing what different people bring to the table in that.
Yeah, that is really cool. It's interesting to think about from a songwriter's perspective, like, what is the one thing that's gonna, like, even if it's the smallest of ideas from someone else, it can really like make or break a song, you know, or it can add something to that, like a color or a flavor to a song that really is meaningful. And it's cool when people recognize that and say, hey, yeah, you're a songwriter on this because you added this flavor to it that it needed.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the first song you ever wrote.
Oh, that's a great question. The first song I ever wrote, I've thought back about this and I feel like there were little like ditties that I wrote through the years when I was in, like middle school.
Right.
But the first one that I can think of was, I think it was at like summer camp, and there was like a verse on the back of our t-shirts, and I was like, I'm gonna write a song based on this verse. And so I wrote this song that I didn't show to anyone because it was terrible, but it was like, I wrote this song.
Right.
I did it,
Right. Did you ever show anyone ever?
No, I never did. It's probably lost in time. I don't even know if I have it written out anywhere.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, what was the first song that you publicly were like, here you go, world, I wrote a song?
To the whole world, or just to like
a subset of the
my
world?
Circle?
Let's say people in your circle.
People in my circle. It took me a long time I wrote in private for years. So It took me a long time to be like, I'm going to share this song.
Yeah. Around, like, how old were you when you were in that process?
Probably, like, honestly, all throughout, like, middle school, high school. Like,
Okay.
I probably didn't share a song really. Like, I shared some songs, like, with my brother and maybe, like, a couple, like, with my best friend at the time. But, like, in terms of, like, playing a song for a bunch of people, I think the first time I did was for my like senior recital. I did like classical piano, and I did more like classical vocal stuff, but then I also had like one song that I wrote that I wanted to share in that recital too. So I did that in high school. So that was kind of the first time I shared a song with the world.
Was it like a lyrical song as well, or was it like
it was lyrics. It was kind of like a folky kind of thing. It was kind of my like dipping my toe in the water of like, I'm doing all this other music, but this is kind of who I really am.
Right.
And it still took like all of college for me to actually gain the confidence to kind of start sharing more so.
Yeah. So you played that first song, and I'm sure you were kind of freaking out about how it would be received. How was it received? Like, what was your feedback on it? Did people know that it was your song?
People did know that it was my song because I had a little, like, I was really nerdy, and I had, like, a bulletin for my senior recital, and I was like, here are all the songs I'm going to play. But, it was actually received really well and kind of, like, better than I expected. I was kind of hoping it would just kind of fly under the radar, and people would be like, man, that Rachmaninoff you played was so cool, and, oh, that other song was so cool. But I actually, like, it was cool because that was the main thing that people told me afterwards was like, hey, I love that song that you wrote. And that meant a lot to me. Yeah. And I think should have given me confidence at that point to then start sharing more, but I was still nervous and shy, and I was like, not yet.
Well, I think there's something valuable and special to people about creativity beyond like skill, right? So like everything else in your recital was more of a showcase of like, this is how I can play the piano, or this is like the things that I can do. But once you step into the world of like, I created this from nothing, I didn't copy something, and it's not just the mechanics of it, it's the thought process of it. I think that just jumps out at people. You know, like you could write a really simple song that is just really tender and creative, and people are like, wow, even if a beginner could play it, you know?
That's so true. I've been to like a lot of open mic nights over the past couple of years, and something that I've noticed is that I always prefer to hear, and like I love hearing really cool covers. Like I do covers sometimes, like covers are awesome, but I always prefer at an open mic night to hear like a really simple, like somebody's very first song, you know, something basic over like the most amazing cover I've ever heard, because it's so meaningful to just hear what are people working on and what's meaningful to them in their work, and how are they writing. And so I totally agree.
Yeah. So at what point did you decide, first of all, songwriting, hey, this is something that I'm good at, and second of all, like, hey, songwriting, this is something that I want to like do a lot more?
I think throughout high school, I kind of started feeling that way. And going into college, I think in the back of my mind, I knew that it was really important to me. And so I did, like, there were a few songs that I shared in college a little bit, and not a lot, but, you know, here and there. And I think throughout that time, I realized that high school and college, I realized that songwriting was just something that I could not do. You know, it was like an intrinsic part of myself that even if I never shared it, or I only shared one song every 5 years or whatever, like it was so important to me, and it just kind of was a part of me that I could not do it. And I knew that I would always be doing it.
That's really cool. At what point did you go then from like, I'm writing a lot of songs, these are just for me, maybe some of my friends that are like, oh, she writes songs, to you were like, hey, I want to like record this, and in a way that's like, you know, the all out, not just like this is a memo on my phone, this is like I'm going all out, I'm recording this either by myself or with someone. Like, what was that process? How did you get there?
Yeah, I think for most artists for whom art is like deeply meaningful and it fulfills a very deep part of your soul, I think there is that desire for other people to see it and to accept it as something meaningful as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that side of things kind of just like grew a little bit over time, and I kind of felt like, yeah, like I like these songs, I want to start sharing them. And I think the hardest part for me was getting over that first hump of like, I'm putting something out into the world. And so like the first project I did, we recorded it live in my college dorm room my senior year, and I put it out that summer. And like, you know, the quality is not very good. And I mean, it's like good for what it is, but it's
Right.
it's not like super like professional mix, like super produced. It's me and my friend doing some percussion. And I think I felt really like self-conscious about that, because I was like, I feel like the first thing I put out needs to be like, this is who I am as an artist, and this is everything that I want it to be. But I got to a point where I was like, I need to break the seal of just sharing creative stuff. And from there, I can just share as I grow as an artist, share as I learn. And it doesn't have to be this like big, high pressure, high stakes, like this has to be the best thing that I've ever made.
Yeah.
I think that was really freeing for me to get to that point where I was like, I just need to share something. It doesn't have to be the best thing I've ever done. It doesn't have to be like, this represents who I am as an artist 100%. And I think that was important to me too, because I think probably most artists feel that way about anything they put out, even if it's really good. I think once you get to the point of sharing it, you're like, now that I'm going to share it, I see these million ways that it could be better, you know? So I think that's something I'm still like learning and figuring out, but that was helpful for me that very initial time.
Yeah. I think every artist is a perfectionist, at least of their own stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think, like, I've yet to meet someone who's like, yeah, that'll work, sounds great. At least when it comes to like things that are close to their heart, you know, like writing their own songs and wanting to do justice by it. There's this high standard that people hold of themselves and this perfectionism. But I mean, it makes sense, right? Because you're creating something that comes from such a personal place. Like, you want it to represent who you are, because we kind of have our identity wrapped up in that thing that we're writing, right? And so, yeah. special.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've had to learn in the past few years of just exploring, like, what is an artist identity? What does that mean? And learning that, like, I have to remember my identity as a human cannot be completely wrapped up in being an artist, because then it will be disappointing when things in the artist are not everything that I want it to be, you know? And it's like, it's hard to do because it's such a deep part of our soul. But I think that's something that has been helpful for me to just like kind of remind myself of, like, outside of music, I'm still a human. I'm still a person with, you know, an identity that, you know, people still love me even if I never created music again, even though that would be terrible and I would never do that, you know, just that kind of like, how do I craft an artist identity that is separate but also still deeply a part of me?
Yeah, that's cool. So tell me about the music that you write. Like, what's the, I haven't listened to really. I've listened to a little bit, very little bit, but
I don't have very much out there, so.
That's true. And I plan to listen to more. But tell me about, like, the style, the topics, the things that really drive you in the music.
Yeah. My style is kind of like folk acoustic, kind of that singer-songwriter kind of vibe. I'm really inspired by, like, old singer-songwriters like Joni Mitchell and James Taylor and Carole King, kind of those classic era singer-songwriters. And I love writing about kind of just like everyday life. Like, I love incorporating elements of nature and kind of often using those as like metaphors in my writing. I'm currently working on a project, and I think all of the songs are kind of all about just like slowing down and like appreciating life and like appreciating the time in between big things. I think we spend a lot of our life like, what's the next big thing that I'm going to do? You know, it's like, I'm going to graduate from high school. I'm going to graduate from college. You know, for me, I like got married, and then it's like, okay, what's next in my career? And like, but I think we spend a lot of time in that in-between times. And so I think a lot of my writing, this project that I'm working on right now is a lot about that. But I think a lot of my writing comes out like that because that's just something important to me. And I think there's a lot to be explored there.
Yeah, that's really cool. That in between, that's cool. I was thinking, even as you were saying that, there's this reality that like the big moments that we spend all of our life living towards and thinking about, they're really short. And then as soon as you get past that hump, it's like, here we are again. And the mundane things. And I've even thought about, like, it's tempting in like the studio, right, with the business trying to build it and like, what's the next thing we're going to do and how do we get there? And in the meantime, like, none of this is what that will be. And so here we are.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I'm excited to hear that. How far in the project are you?
So all the songs have been written, and I've demoed all the songs, and I'm kind of starting to record. For now, I'm doing kind of the basic recording just from my apartment.
Do you need someone to record?
Maybe. I'm kind of doing some basic recording for my apartment, and then from there, maybe gonna layer some stuff. Nathaniel Dolsky, who was on the show a few weeks ago, has helped me a little bit with some stuff, and so I think later on in the process, gonna bring him in a little bit more.
Nice.
But yeah, so I'm kind of working on just kind of getting those foundation elements done on the record, and hoping for a fall release, but I've been dealing with a lot of vocal problems this summer. Like the week I was going to start recording, my voice was like, I hate you, we're not doing this. And it was just like these weird, so I went to the doctor, just like all these different things. So anyway, it's kind of been a slower process than it seemed, but I'm enjoying the process in the in-between stage. You know, it's like, I feel like it's, I'm learning what I write about. So I feel sometimes I'll quote songs to myself and be like, do I believe that? I don't know if I believe it anymore. But yeah.
That's cool. So here's the situation. If you're listening to the podcast right now, you've not noticed anything change, and that's perfect. If you're watching it, you may notice that the lighting looks a little different. And that's because sometimes we forget to charge lights and they just die. And then we have to use backups. But I can make this work because in the world of metaphor, sometimes when you're writing songs, the lights just go out. Julie, have you felt that way before?
You know, sometimes you just don't feel like getting a song out there. But something that I think is one of the most important parts of songwriting is just consistency. Sometimes you got to write a bad song to get through to a good song. But if you just keep writing, you get to the ones that you like.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that songwriting process, like writing a song for you. Sometimes it looks like trial and error with a bunch of songs, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I love having a lot of hobbies outside of songwriting, which sounds kind of funny, but I think it's important to like live a rich and meaningful life from which you can then draw inspiration from songwriting. So I love, reading and like thinking, like pulling out like, oh, I love this word, I'm going to use this word in a song, or cutting out pictures from magazines and be like, man, this is really cool, I'm going to, think about this for a song. And so I love that kind of like living a life that I can pull song ideas from and words and metaphors and those kinds of things. But then in the just like nitty gritty of songwriting, I typically love to write like melody and lyrics at the same time and chords, and I sit down and sometimes I'll change it later, but it all kind of comes at once for me. And I typically sit down and write a full song in kind of one songwriting session. I get in the zone and just write songs, and I certainly like edit them later, but just getting it out there is really important for me.
How fast do you typically like write a song?
It depends on the song. I would say typically maybe like a couple hours.
Really?
Yeah.
What is the longest amount of time it's taken you to write a song?
In one sitting or like over time?
Like over time.
Over
like
time.
A song that you didn't actually give up on and you're like,
Yeah.
this isn't going to work. Like it actually got finished, even if it wasn't like amazing.
There's definitely songs that I wrote a couple verses for, maybe like 4 years ago. And like I can think of one that I finished like last year that I had started, maybe 4 years ago. And I pretty regularly go back through like old songwriting notebooks and old voice memos, and I listen for like melodic ideas or choruses or different things that I can pull from to like take my own content and redo it and make it something better. But yeah, probably like 4 or 5 years, like I wrote something and then kind of revisited it at a later time.
So it sounds like you kind of give yourself like personal songwriting session times. Am I hearing that correct?
Yeah, for the most part. I think like this year I've been focusing a lot on recording, so songwriting has been like a little bit of a second tier thing. But when I'm in a big writing phase, I try to write at least like once or twice a week.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Do you ever have moments where you're just like not planning on writing a song and like an idea happens and you're like, shoot, I got to write this down now?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And do you find that happens more or less than like the premeditated, let's sit down and write a song?
I think it happens less for me than just sitting down and making a focused attempt to write something.
Interesting.
But I think that I definitely have maybe like melodic ideas or lines that will come to me that I'll kind of mull on. But it won't be like a full idea that I'm gonna grab suddenly and then write the song.
That's interesting because I feel like I'm the opposite. I mean, and to be fair, I am only kind of a songwriter. Like I've written some stuff, but I haven't written a song in a couple months at this point. But whenever I've written a song, it's because I'm driving, I'm doing something, or something happens, and all of a sudden I hear a melody or I hear a concept or a line. Like I think yesterday I had like an inspiration for a song that I might write. And it's like, that's the times where it's like, hold on, I got to slow down, stop, I got to write this down. And that's typically how songwriting's happened for me. And when I've tried to flip it and it's like, all right, let's write a song now, it just hasn't usually worked for me. Yeah. Which might be a discipline thing in part too. Like I've done less songwriting and it's less of like, this is a routine I'm going to put in my life. But I've also had times where I've had a really good idea, I thought, and once I sat down to write it, I just couldn't get it out.
Sure. Yeah.
Have you had writer's block?
Yeah, totally. I feel like there's kind of the writer's block of like, I want to write a song, but I don't even know what is a song. What even could I even possibly write about? You know, there's that kind of writer's block, but then there's kind of also the kind that you're talking about with like, you have this idea and in your mind, it's like, I know what this song could be. And I love the idea of what this song could be. But then you kind of get to writing it and it's like, I don't like this, you know, or like, I like this little part of it, but I can't get the rest of it to be as good as this one little part that I really like.
Yeah.
And for me, like those are the songs that I'll say, okay, I'm setting this on the shelf. I'm going to come back to it another time. Maybe I have some verses that I could tack onto this cool chorus that I like, or maybe I have, you know, something else later on that I can add and put together a finished song. And sometimes they just kind of sit, you know, but I think I really try to finish songs as much as I can, even if I don't like them, just because I think it's helpful to kind of have that, like, okay, I finished this whole song. Maybe I'll change the whole thing sometime, but like getting it finished is important. But
kind of like you're archiving it.
Yeah, it's like that goes in the archives, and maybe I'll revisit it, and maybe I'll hate it forever. But yeah.
So songwriting process starts with, I'm going to sit down and write a song. I'm going to maybe look at the bank of things that I've doodled in the past or voice memos of a melody line that's cool, and I'm going to build something in this. Once you feel like you've built something that is rough or you're feeling really good about it, like what do you do then?
Typically, lately, I really like to get some sort of feedback from it. So usually I'll do like a round of edits myself before I share it. Sometimes I'll share it with my husband first, but typically I'll write the song and then maybe, you know, another day I'll revisit it and do kind of like a round of like, sometimes some songs don't need a lot of editing, but I think a lot of songs can still benefit from that like really careful eye of like, do I have extra words in here that I don't need? Is this melody doing exactly what it should do?
Yeah.
So I'll go in and kind of do that. And then nowadays I really like to take it like to my songwriting group and get feedback from the songwriting group, or get feedback from my husband. He's a musician as well, and kind of talk through like, what do we like? What do we not like? And I think I definitely keep track of what songs that I share tend to kind of like how they're received, and like there's certainly songs that I love that maybe haven't been received like the best, but it's still like I love this song, so I'm, you know, I don't care what anyone thinks. But then there's also songs where it's like I don't know how I feel about this song, and other people coming in and giving those thoughts on it can really help determining like, is this one that I should put in like potential future album, or is this one that's just like fun to play live sometimes, or is this one that I'm just going to share with family, or, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how many songs have you written? Like, do you know? Are you sure? Do you have like a number count that where you just like keep crossing it off, you know, another song?
That's a great question, because at one point I was like, I'm going to go through and like catalog all the songs I've written, because I love writing by hand. And so it's not like I have like, oh, I have this many Google Docs or whatever.
Right.
So I was like, I'm going to go through and try to, and I had never finished that project. But probably a couple hundred if I had to guess.
Wow.
Would I share 90% of those songs? Probably not.
I mean, sure. But I mean,
yeah.
I remember when I was first writing music, and they say, you know, like for a 10-song album, like you should write like 30, 40 songs. And I remember thinking like, there's not 40 different topics in the world I could write about.
Yeah.
Like that idea was just so lofty. And I mean, at this point, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I get it. But hundreds of songs, wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's going back to like middle school, you know, including all of the random ditties through the years.
But I mean, but those count.
Yeah.
Those count. It's like 100 different unique creative ideas. And that's pretty special.
Yeah.
Nice. So once you have done all of those things, right, you've kind of run it through the vetting system, and you're like, this song I really like. I guess it probably depends on if you're working on a project at the moment. Do you typically write songs to a specific end of like, this is for this project, or do you write songs for the uniqueness of the song, and then you look at what you have and see, oh, these actually work well together?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think I think I tend to, when I'm in one season of life, I tend to write songs kind of around I gather them all up and I see, oh, they're kind of all around this one theme because I'm kind of in this season of life.
Yeah.
So I think there is that element of it. But there are also times where I've written songs thinking towards like maybe this will be this kind of certain project. That hasn't really worked for me very well so far, but I've tried that idea.
Yeah.
Like one time in college, I had a really cool English professor who, for the final project, he was like, you can do anything for the final project except for write a paper. I don't want you to write a paper. So people like made cakes or like, did all this like random, really cool stuff. But
Yeah.
I wrote like a 4-song EP for that final project.
Huh.
And it was about supporting characters in different books that we had read that semester. So like
nice.
that project, I was like, I'm picking this character from this book and I'm going to write a song and it's going to be for this little tiny project that I'm doing. So, there have been little things like that, but in terms of like this album that I'm working on, it's like my first full-length album. And I kind of started writing songs for it thinking like, I think it'll be kind of this one theme. And then it really morphed over time based on the songs that I wrote.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of as I do more projects, because I haven't really done a whole lot of like big like albums. Like this is my first full-length album. I did like a little EP and one single. So it'll be interesting to see, because I have ideas for future albums of like, I think this kind of theme would be cool. But it would be interesting to see as I go, like, will that actually happen or will it become something else that it wants to be?
Yeah. So let's talk about that album.
Yes.
So you've alluded to the topics and the themes and some stuff like that. What talk to me about it? Like, how long has it been in the making? What is the kind of the general theme or feel of it? What's the vibe? What are you hoping to achieve with it?
Yeah.
How's
So
it
many
going?
good questions. So many good questions.
We can do those one at a time.
No,
but
that's okay.
Just want
I
to
can just talk
throw
about it.
them all at you and
I'll
let you
just
go.
talk about it. So I've been wanting to do a full-length album for probably as long as I've been writing songs, and it's just been something that I thought about doing it in college and kind of just did this little EP instead to just kind of get going. And I think it's good that I kind of waited, because I think for all these years I was like, okay, these are the songs that are going to be on the album. And then I wrote more songs that I liked a lot better and kind of was able to grow as a songwriter. And I think the set of songs that I finally landed on, it feels really right, and they feel like they're really supposed to belong together. So it's 11 songs, and I would say there's a lot of like I mentioned, I like writing a lot about like nature themes and that sort of thing. But there's kind of like 3 sections of the album, and the first section is kind of like nature related, and also kind of about like me personally, like my personal, like a little bit, like there's metaphors in it kind of about like my growing up and like that kind of stuff. And then the second section is kind of more relational. So like there's a couple songs in it that I like about me and my husband and like life together and friendships and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the last little section of the album is more about kind of relating to the world and like kind of almost like a call to artists and people in the world of like, hey, you are seen, your art is known and that sort of thing. So kind of those 3 little sections, but all kind of around that theme of slowing down, appreciating this kind of in-between phase of life.
That's really cool. So compositionally, how big or small, sparse, full, where are you hoping to take it? Is it going to go multiple places, or do you think it's going to kind of be pretty consistent?
In terms production-wise? My music, I think, lends itself to a more sparse production, but I haven't ever really done a project with anything with a lot of layers to it, and I'm really trying to explore that. So there's a couple parts that I've written some string parts for that I have a friend of mine that's going to play violin on, and I want to layer in some percussion and some more, harmonies and background vocals and just kind of those different elements. I think it's still going to be production-wise, as far as, all albums go, pretty sparse. But for me, it's going to be a lot more produced than I've done in the past.
Yeah. That's cool. And one of the big things that I was talking with Nathaniel about is the challenge of creating something that is full, but is still in that sparse place, because everything has to be more intentional, right?
Yeah.
Like you need to have, if you're going to write that violin line, like it's not going to just disappear in this big band sound. So like you really want it to complement what the guitar's doing. And
Totally.
I just, like last week, I think it was, I was working on composing and like producing a track for a client. And it was similar. It's a shorter track. It's the intro for his album. And the first half of it is just the acoustic guitar and him singing. And there's a point which would feel like a chorus where there's like a drop. And I've got what sounds kind of like a timpani drums that like hit, and just a nice firm like piano chord on the down. And like I built this orchestral sound. So I have like the cello and like the viola and double bass kind of going on, and I was like in that moment trying to compose it, like how can I make it so each part has this like to and fro of you're feeling the movement of this and then you hear this, so it isn't just noise, because the goal isn't just noise, it's to like tell a story and
Totally.
bring people in with that.
Totally. Yeah, I think, and I don't know if you have found this and kind of working on that type of music as well. I think something that I've found in this process, because production is not my strong suit, but it's something that I really want to learn on, and I'm kind of using this first album to like really like dig into that and get better at it.
That's cool.
But something that I've found is like I'll make a bunch of stuff that I'm going to layer on top of it, and then I listen to it, and then I just kind of slowly take them out one by one, and I'm like, yeah, it's better without it all, you know? It's like you get excited and start layering stuff, and sometimes it makes something really magical and you're excited about it, and sometimes it's just like, no, it's too much.
Yeah, for what it's worth, that's pretty common.
Yeah.
Let me throw all of these things out as my brain is thinking jarble of like, this would be cool, this would be cool, this would be cool. Here we go. And then you're like, all right, let's take that out. Let's take that out. Let's mix and match. Try these things or these things.
Yeah.
And sometimes you come back to like, oh, we're not going to use any of that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other times where you're like, oh, this actually works really well. Like that same track that I produced was one of the few times that I feel like, as everything that I was writing, I was like, this works and we're going to keep it, because I think that whole track, we got everything produced and written and recorded in like 3 hours, which usually it's like a multi-day, multi-process thing where it's like, we're going to do this, we're going to sit and think on it, we're going to try some other stuff, we're going to sit and think on that, we're going to show it to some people. And like halfway through, another friend of mine came into the studio and we're like, hey, what do you think about this play? And they're like, dude, that sounds dope.
Yeah, it's always really exciting when in a song or like a project, when you kind of get it in that zone and it's like, this works and this works and yes, and this, you know, it's kind of like that high of creating, you know, and it's always really rewarding too when you finish it and you show it to someone else and they're like, yeah, that is actually good. And you didn't just spiral down a rabbit hole and are going crazy, you know.
Because the flip side, there is like nothing worse than like putting all your time into something. You're like, this is amazing. This is awesome. And you play it for someone and they're like, You're like, no. It's amazing. And this is why it's amazing. But the fact that I'm explaining this to you means it's probably not going to stick. And that is just really sad.
Yeah. But then when you revisit it, you're like, that was a good point. I mean, sometimes you're like, no, I still love it.
Sometimes,
but
yeah.
I feel like I've experienced that with like, I am not a professional graphic designer by any means, but I do some graphic design in my work and have for a while. And I find that kind of same thing with that, where it's like, I created this really cool thing and I'm going to show it to you. And you're like, that looks terrible. Or I don't like any of these elements, which is the whole thing, you know? And
it's frustrating because you can come, and I think this is true in anything creative. You can come to a conclusion with something and a finished product that there's a lot of intentionality behind, and it's kind of almost cryptic, right? Like it's not just super low-hanging fruit, super on the nose, but then you realize the fact that you have to explain it to everyone that sees it means that it's probably not going to actually land, which is just always such a bummer.
Yeah.
I think you can get away with it in songwriting because I think a lot of people listen to music not so much deeply processing the lyrics. And like I've listened to albums, then gone back later and heard like the behind the scenes of like where it was coming from. And I was like, that's really cool. Or even I've listened to albums that the first couple times I listened to it, I didn't know what it was about, but I've listened to it so many times now that I'm like, oh yeah, there's this theme this whole way. I get it. This is awesome. But I think in general with creative work, the deeper you get into something, the more likely you're going to reach a point where people are like, I don't like that. I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something I found with like songwriting is sometimes I'll write like 3 songs that are kind of all saying the same thing. And it's kind of just like carving away at it each time, just like a little bit more like, what am I saying? Like the first time it's like, okay, here's this, block of marble, and I kind of chipped away a little bit.
Yep.
And then you get to phase 2 and it's like, okay, I'm gonna kind of going in a little bit deeper. And then finally when you do it again, and sometimes that's the editing process, and sometimes it's like scrapping and redoing the whole thing again and again until it's like, this is the gold. This is what I wanted.
Yeah. Do you start strictly with lyrics? Do you sometimes start with a melody? Do you how do you typically work with that?
For the most part, I start with like music and lyrics kind of at the same time. I find that it flows for me that way.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll start with like a title or a concept and then kind of work from that.
Cool. So when is this album coming out?
Hopefully in November. That's the plan right now.
Okay. So you've made some decent progress on it.
Yeah, somewhat. We're getting there.
Getting there.
Yeah.
Very fun. Very fun. What's the name of the album? Do you know yet?
The working title right now is Unhurried.
Unhurried. I like that.
Thank you.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah. Excited to share it. Hopefully we'll get it out. So.
Yeah. The past projects that you've worked on, so the EP that you did, Nathaniel did that, right?
He didn't do the EP. He did, I did a single a year later, and he did that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The EP, was that the live one that you did?
That was the live one, and I had a friend he's really great at engineering, but it was just like not the ideal environment in my dorm room, So it was just kind of like a really raw thing that honestly, looking back is meaningful to me that it was so raw, because it was kind of like me taking that first step, and a lot of the songs were kind of about that, of like, hey, I am timid, and I'm like, what could this look like for me to create? And so I think it being really raw, it's not the best production quality, but I think that it's meaningful to me, even if it's not to anyone else. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and this may be a controversial opinion, but I mean, I think that's why indie music is so big. A lot of times over pop music is pop really leans into the perfectionism of everything, right? Like everything is in time, everything's locked in. And in the world of like indie music, there's a lot more of this imperfection in the name of the artistry that happens. And I respect that a lot. I enjoy that. And I think a lot of creatives appreciate that as well. So
yeah,
I think high production isn't necessarily better production.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It can certainly vary based on genre and person and song.
Right. Yeah. So, thinking forward with the future, dreams, hopes, plans, what are they?
I would love to just be able to continue to write music and share it and have the, I think sometimes it's like I get really like artsy thinking about making music and all this stuff, but there is also like a practical element of like having the financial ability to record and having the, that kind of space to create. And so I would love to have, my life be able to have a little more space to do that, both like time-wise and financially. And like, so whatever that looks like I'm open to it still being kind of a side, bivocational thing like we were talking about.
Yeah.
Or maybe someday a full-time thing. I think that would be really cool too. But either way, I just hope that I can continue creating, continue writing, because I know I always will, no matter if anyone hears it.
Right. Yeah. Creative people can't help but create.
Yeah.
That's super special. I've enjoyed this podcast for the same reason, but also just this business in general, like getting to meet more creative people.
Yeah.
And even think forward about like what does working together look like, and what is like collabing and getting ideas and having just a wider circle of people that have different perspectives.
Totally.
is exciting to me. I enjoy that.
Yeah. It's exciting to meet people and to get to know people there's so many people creating cool things and making art and making music that they might, might not have a name, but are doing super cool things and are really interesting, exciting people to get to know and learn and collaborate. So I totally agree. It's exciting to have that community.
Yeah, for sure. Do you play at any like small coffee shops or shows or things like that? Have you done much of that?
Prior to the pandemic, I was doing several shows and I was doing a lot of like open mic nights and stuff. Since the pandemic, I kind of spent a lot of the pandemic like songwriting, and then now I'm doing a lot of recording. So I've hit up a couple open mic nights this summer, but I haven't done a lot of performing, but I like hope to.
Makes sense.
I hope to get back to that.
If there was a world where you didn't have to be bivocational and like this creative side of you could be like your full-time thing.
Yeah.
Would that be something you'd even want?
I think I would. Yeah. I think that I don't know what it would necessarily look like for me, because I love performing, but I love songwriting the most, and I could totally see myself doing more songwriting and even songwriting for like a publishing company and not for all my own stuff and having other people do songs. So I don't know. I think that I don't know if the forever touring life is something that I would want. And, you know, when you're a singer-songwriter and that's your full-time thing, touring is such a big part of that.
Right.
So I don't know. I would like to experience doing some touring, but I don't know if I would want to commit to like, this is my gig forever.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fun conversation.
Yeah.
If people wanted to listen to your music, how could they find it?
Yeah. So my website is fromjuliemarie.com.
Okay.
And all of my social media stuff is at fromjuliemarie. So you can, probably the easiest way to find my music is going through my website to get those links. But I also love connecting with people on social media and share music on there as well. So.
Cool. Do you have stuff just on like Spotify and stuff
Correct.
as well?
Yeah.
So people can add you to the playlists?
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm excited to hear that album.
Yeah.
And just see what other things in the future hold.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on the show, having the conversation, checking out the studio, all the things.
Yeah. Such a great space, and thanks for inviting me on the show. This was great.
Absolutely. And we will talk to you guys later.
Bye.